Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Connelly with CRC Press, and we're doing a State of Game Audio here at GDC outside the Moscone. And I'm here with Steve Horowitz, Guy Somberg, and Scott Looney, all CRC Press authors. Steve Horowitz is a audio director and composer and author of our Essential Guide to Game Audio, along with Scott Looney, and the forthcoming Theory and Practice of Music for Games. He's worked for Nickelodeon Digital. He did the soundtrack for the Academy Award-winning film Super Size Me, and also a Grammy Award winner. Scott Looney is the CTO and co-founder of the Game Audio Institute. And Guy Somberg, another author of our game audio programming books, which volumes 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. And he is the lead gameplay engineer at Hectra Games. So
Coming out with 4.
4, yes, with the 4th coming soon.
4th coming. Right.
Because there are excellent books. So thanks for joining me, guys. We're just going to have a loose conversation about the state of game audio and get your guys' input on things. And so the first question kind of for all of you, and we can pass the mic down, is, what would you say is the number one skill a student needs to have to understand game audio in your field, be it composing, teaching, or programming? You want to kick us off, Steve?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. It's great. Glad you guys were doing this. I think really for students, the number one skill that they need to have is curiosity and ability to really be open to learning new things, right? And exploring new ideas. So if they come in and they're a composer, and I'm a composer, that's all I want to do, then they also really need to look at some of the programming side, of the technical sound design side. And that's true of all the different métiers. If they're a really great sound designer, they need to be exploring all aspects of games and be curious about the game industry, what's happening here at Moscone, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think a good amount of entrepreneurship, self-learning, curiosity, that is just going to be the best because, as these guys will tell you too as well, things are moving so fast. Things are changing all the time, and it's hard to keep up with everything, but you, in a lot of ways, have to be a technical evangelist and really love games. And I think that's a really a good place to start.
Cool. So I'm obviously coming from the programming background. So the thing that I like to tell people is, they come to me and say, I want to be an audio programmer. What do I need to learn? Well, first of all, you are a magical unicorn, so thank you. But what I tell people is that game audio programming is just audio programming, and audio programming is just programming. It's just applying it, and so being able to understand programming fundamentals, and then being able to learn to know what's happening in the audio field and have creative ideas about how to apply the programming ideas to the audio ideas and mix them together.
I would have to go with Steve's response here, actually, because of the curiosity thing. Because sorry, yeah. Anyway, no, because the idea of really just sort of going in and diving in on things, I think, is really one of the biggest traits. I had a student in a recent class at AAU, and he had already gone into Grand Theft Auto and ripped out all the audio files to determine how things were kind of constructed and everything like that. And that sort of totally go-getter thing, we never had, he's never been asked to do this kind of thing. He just was curious about how audio worked in Grand Theft Audio. So he just pulled that stuff out. And now he understands even the file naming conventions now, because every file was named exactly so, inside the game, So yeah, I think that's a really, really good starting point. And then from there, self-starting, being able to just sort of find the answer yourself, because a lot of times there isn't a teacher to just suddenly give you an answer for things, Yeah.
And
I like that you called it Grand Theft Audio.
Yeah, Grand Theft Audio is one of my favorite games, actually. By the way, you actually no, I'm not going to. Grand Theft Audio is you just take the radios out of the cars, right? And then as you're driving around. But to Scott's point, and just to talk a little bit more about it, and I think from the programming side you would agree as well, is that students, or not even students, but people who are interested in the game industry, people who are interested in pretty much anything these days, but we're talking about games, they're going to YouTube. There's so much available from YouTube and Twitch and so much information out there, some of it good, some of it bad, and I think that being able, there's a lot that a self-starter can do, and then formalizing that along the way is also, something that should happen at some point, right? Because that's the other part of it too, is that, we get a lot of students who are very confused about things because they're like, well, I did this program, or I did that, and then they're like, they just have more questions than answers at the end of the day, right? Because they don't really understand the context, the full context. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, you mentioned someone pulling the audio stuff out of Grand Theft Auto. You see a lot of this, non-professional self-starter stuff when you look at like the modding scene and what a lot of people are doing with like atmospheric music and ambience in like Skyrim or the Fallout games or and even Grand Theft Auto. So, well, a question for you, Scott, is you're kind of a technical sound designer. What is technical sound design? What sort of skills do people need to kind of to do that?
Well, at this point in time, I would say absolutely, it used to just be like, that there was no such thing. There wasn't really just no such position effectively. I would say that we start with implementation, which would be understanding audio middleware, how it works. In terms of things like middleware like Fmod or Wise, or there's other brands besides that. There's one called CRIware in Japan that's being used a lot. But the thing I think that's important to understand is that none of those will necessarily solve your problems if you don't understand how the game relates to the middleware and how it triggers the middleware, how the game is structured in such a way to trigger the middleware in a particular way. I just came from a previous thing where they were talking about how they had composed the music, and it was kind of a last minute sort of thing. And so as a result, it was a lot of effort to try to turn this extremely already composed music into something interactive inside the game. Well, if that process had started earlier, and if the person who understood that, could ask those questions earlier even, then it's possible that could have been avoided, and that could, that they could create some kind of temp music that would follow the sort of basic structure of that music and then be able to go and do that. So pursuant to that situation, the other thing that is becoming kind of a requirement is familiarity with game engines. What that basically means is, at the moment anyway, Unity C# experience. You have to know how to program, or at least a little bit of scripting in C# to be able to look through the code and find little places where you can stick where your footstep event is supposed to go or whatever like that. In Unreal, it means experience with Blueprints, which is their visual scripting system, which is fairly robust. Even though Unity has a visual scripting system, it is not robust.
Would you throw Metasounds in there now?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Metasounds is also Blueprints, basically. It's the same concepts. It's using the same formulas and methods and stuff. It's just specifically for audio. But yes, familiarity with Metasounds might be a possibility. One of the things, though, that I've definitely seen is some comment about Metasounds is that Metasounds is not really meant to deal with, like, it's more for procedural audio generation. It's definitely not for music composition. It would have to be taught to be musically aware. You'd have to create a whole big system to do that. And so far, nobody's really come up with any kind of off-the-shelf thing that just makes that stuff work, essentially, so far. Anyway, that's my...
Yeah. Well, speaking of of middleware, and we mentioned this. Question for you, Guy. Have you had any experience with Unreal's Metasound engine for procedural sound and music generation, and do you have anything to comment for that?
Certainly, yeah. Aaron and the rest of the audio team at Epic have done a spectacular job. They've gone from Unreal's audio was not very powerful to now it is kind of a headlining feature, which I think is pretty spectacular. I have not used Metasounds specifically, but I've looked a lot into them. I've spoken with Aaron, and the thing about it is that every middleware that you use, whether it's Fmod or Wise or Metasounds or anything, underneath the foundations of it, there is a DSP graph. And then the abstraction that the middleware puts above that DSP graph is what distinguishes it, right? Fmod has a much more DAW-like interface. Wise has a much more kind of data-structured interface. And Metasounds bring that DSP graph into the foreground, into the forefront. You're manipulating the DSP graph. You're injecting blueprint code in and out of that graph. And that makes it exceptionally powerful. And then, so this is kind of the abstraction that they've chosen. So, yeah, I think it's a great tool. I'm excited to see what kind of people come up with it. But the nice thing is that if that's not the abstraction that you and your sound designers want to work with, then there's other options, for that kind of higher level abstraction, the way of thinking about authoring and integrating sounds into your game.
How do you think, I'm just curious, how you think Metasound sort of compares to Max and the way Max kind of deals with sound? Because it looks the same, you're dragging things around, boxes,
Boxes and lines, that's what I call it.
Yeah.
I have not used Max to any meaningful degree, but I think the answer that I can provide is that it's just learning from Max and applying those learnings to game-specific context.
That's what I was curious about. Yeah.
Aaron was definitely very influenced by Max MSP's sort of data flow-oriented layout when designing Metasounds, for sure.
Got it.
By the way, this Aaron character we're talking about is Aaron McLaren, the lead audio engineer at Epic Games.
Yeah.
I saw him eat a sandwich the other day.
He's a real person. They're just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Well, kind of moving on to kind of the more game music end of things. Steve, what is game music? You're a composer and audio director. What's game music? How do you educate your students in how to experience game music and, approach to composition?
No, that's a good question. And actually, as we're working, Scott and I are working on the new book, and I'm teaching my Scoring for Games class this semester. I mean, we start with a basic definition of what is music, right? And, I came up in the latter part of the 20th century, so I accept the definition. I don't know if Scott does or other people do, that music is organized sound, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the latter half of the 20th century in music and all forms of music have proven that to be the case. That's from Edgar Varese. That's not me. Varese, composer, mid-century, high modernist. Go listen to Hyperprism, great piece. Don't know if you've heard it. But he's got a bunch of wonderful, very abstract pieces. But this idea that music is sound kind of opened up the latter half of the 20th century for composers like John Cage, and the experimental tradition of really anything could be music, right? I could play a blender, I could play a bicycle, et cetera, et cetera. These are all musical gestures, ambient sounds, basically anything that can be organized by the human mind. And I've really come to just a simpler definition, I hope a simpler definition for game music these days, which is that game music is sound that's organized for a game. Simple. So as composers, anytime we apply the mechanics of a game to our music, we're game composers. So I'm trying to get to a simple definition. I don't know if I'm there. Did I get there, Scott? You might want to comment.
I think the idea is that in time is the kind of, even though music can often be suspended in time, most of the time it's usually not. So it's organized sound in time, sort of like, that there's timing involved in it, and also events and interactivity that are also involved in it.
Right.
That'd probably be a little bit way of, making it more detailed.
Well, I mean, not to be argumentative.
Yeah, but go ahead.
But the idea that if we sat here and we listened, there's time happening.
Oh,
Time flows through us, right? Takamitsu, right? Time is flowing through us. So in the same way, I see time flowing through a game. I don't, it might be a different abstraction of time.
Agree.
Right? Anyway, that's getting pretty heavy, but hopefully that answered it. Yeah. Game composers write music for games, but we're still just composers.
Yep.
I don't define myself as a game composer. I am a composer. Sometimes I write music for games, sometimes I write music for concert halls, sometimes I write it for film, and all of those things have just different specific aspects to them. But I'm just a composer.
Well, let's talk about AI, because AI is huge all over the place in all the different disciplines, be it art, audio, so forth. How is AI changing things for you guys, be it composition or the programming or anything at all? How you're approaching your students with AI? How's it impacting game audio?
Am I starting? Okay. Yeah. AI is, I don't like this term AI applied to like large language models and machine learning, because it's, AI is a loaded term, but it's the term that kind of we've settled on. So I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah.
Okay, as a programmer, there's some spectacular magical things happening with AI. If you use Microsoft GitHub Copilot, I used it for a little test project the other day, or I guess a few months ago now, and it was pretty spectacular. Like I wrote the first 2 words in a line of code, and it filled in the entire function, and that was like pretty good. And it was like that wasn't the function I needed, but I went ahead and but that was what was cool, is that I accepted it, made some tweaks, and it was filling it in. As I was making the, oh, you meant this. Okay, let me. And so those kinds of things it changes the conversation. Yeah. Rather than me telling the computer, I want to do this, and here's all of it. It's, I want to do this. The computer tells me, well, do you mean this? And it becomes a conversation rather than me typing it out. It becomes me having a conversation with an agent. It's not an intelligent agent, but it's with an agent that can often get the right answer.
Yeah. That's absolutely 100% my experience so far. And I have not been using it to do any audio, or not too much audio, comparatively speaking. I have been occasionally using it to do certain kinds of tasks in middleware, but I'm also been hired as a dev for a particular other project. And there was a lot of stuff about that there where it's like, I don't know how to do that. Let me see if you can get me started on that. And I can then look at your output and I can go, oh, no, you didn't, no, that's not the way it was. Yeah, let me put that back in. Oh, by the way, let's do this, And so it becomes this totally exactly what you said. Like it's a conversation between an enthusiastic, but not quite totally with it assistant and yourself. And you're going back and forth and going, no, that's not quite right. Try it this way. And then sometimes you have to look at the code and go, no, I'll just do it like this. Here, I solved the problem. But you got me half the way there, or you got me 60% of the way there, or something like that. I find that to be incredibly valuable, actually. One of the things that happened recently was I was having to organize some data in the Unity inspector. I had to make a Unity property drawer for that. I had no idea how to make a Unity property drawer. So it made at least something, and then I was able to then tweak it a little bit further and go back and forth with the thing until I finally got what I wanted as a result. So I think it's a really useful tool. It is interesting that when I posted about it, I was actually thinking about it as a very useful tool for students or people who are at game companies and they decide not to use middleware, but you want to get middleware-like behavior. For a programmer like Guy, being able to, say, play sounds from like a random array at random locations is an extremely easy thing to do. But for somebody who doesn't have any idea how to program that sort of stuff, or maybe has a little bit of a clue, because you kind of do have to have a little bit of a clue so you can check your assistant's work a little bit, right? Can't just assume that they're just perfect and you just stick it in there and be like, well, it compiles, but now I have no idea what's happening. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so it was interesting that the people who responded to my post that I made about it as being useful from middleware perspectives, kept thinking about it, oh, well, then it'll replace the audio engine. Oh, and like, I'm a better programmer than that any day, It was just, and it was really hilarious. I was like, no, it's not for you. It's for people who are barely learning this thing and using it kind of almost as a teaching tool, actually, which I think is very useful.
I'll speak to this. You guys have way more information than I do, but we just came out of our game devs working together, audio-centered focus roundtable, and we could not get anybody in the room to stop talking about AI. I literally said, let's not talk about AI anymore, and proposed another question, and then it just kept flopping back to people talking about AI. And what was interesting, and I'll talk about this from the composer perspective, from the music perspective, from the audio designer perspective, they're scared. They're like, "Whoa, what's going to happen when they don't need me? Like, I'm just entering the industry. What about 5 years from now? I'm trying to get a job and, well, AI is doing it better than I could, or it's going to replace me." And I think there's a lot of fear sort of around that idea of AI, the AI apocalypse. And so, I myself personally am not afraid of the AI apocalypse. But I know that there were many people in that room that their concern is what's coming, and I also reminded people in the room of a couple things, that technology has replaced a lot of the things that musicians used to do, right? Yeah, right? There used to be synthesizers, samplers, orchestras, right? Yeah. There used to be bands everywhere, and now it's a DJ or it's one person with a laptop. And we're used to technology doing that. So, the other thing that I didn't say that I wanted to say in the talk, but people were so active and wanting to talk, is that there is, I think Guy might appreciate this. So there's an Isaac Asimov story that I always bring up to my students, and it's called The Profession. And long story short, basically, because it's an Asimov story, there's a time, people are young and they're coming out of high school and they have to decide, they have to be told what they're going to be. So they put things on their heads and they scope it out and they say, "Oh, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to go to Mars, you're going to mine lithium."
Well, yeah. Well, it's probably like certain education systems, but a computer is, or some program is saying what they're going to do, and all the students are super happy. It's like, great, I'm an engineer, I'm going to do this, that. And there's one dude who, they don't know what he's going to be, and everyone's worried and upset for him, and they're like, "Oh my God," his parents are mortified. It's like, "Oh my God, the test didn't work," and they send him to this special place, and everyone thinks he's, going to a bad place, and that this is a terrible thing that's happened to him. But actually, they send him to the place where he's one of the. It becomes clear that he's one of the few people left on planet Earth who can think creatively, and that he's going to the house, which is I think of Professor X's school of gifted students, where they make all the stuff that everybody else gives them.
Yeah,
and so. I think that's kind of it's an old Asimov short story, but I think it's a nice parallel, potentially, for AI.
I just have one quick thing to add before we move on to the next question, which is that that's a great story. I need to find it.
Yeah, you can find the whole thing online, actually. Just Isaac Asimov, The Profession. If you look for, someone put the entire story up, and in fact, it's really hilarious. It looks like it was put up in the 90s or 2000s.
I love those websites.
Oh my God.
That's when the web was great.
1.0.
So what I was going to say is, I mentioned earlier, when I've worked with the co-pilot, it's like constant conversation with this agent. And I feel as though that's what, people are worried about their jobs. That's what their jobs will turn into. So rather than crafting the sound, it's having a conversation with the AI or with the agent.
Yeah.
That is, and we're crafting a sound together. And that I think is kind of where the direction that some of these things are moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point too. And not to beat the AI, I think that there's another great book. It's called Little Heroes by Norman Spinrad, a science fiction writer, who wrote Floyd Captain's Tale. Have you read that one, Little Heroes?
No.
Yeah, it's about cyber future where pop stars are created completely from scratch. And anyway, look it up. It's a great book.
Look, we're starting to run out a little bit of time, but I figured it would be a good opportunity to maybe have you guys talk about both of your forthcoming books. And I also want to mention that for your existing books, if you would like to order Essential Guide to Game Audio or Game Audio Programming 1, 2, or 3, you can use our discount code DIS20 to get a 20% discount. But yeah, if you guys want to take a few minutes to talk about, your forthcoming book and Game Audio Programming 4, that would be great.
Sure. Why don't we want to go left to right?
Yeah. Okay, fine. So yeah, we're in the middle of writing this game music book at the moment. We've certainly learned a lot teaching the subject in terms of what we thought would be important, super important to talk to students about 5 years ago or 8 years ago, or when we started teaching this 10 years ago, really, becomes less important or becomes, less salient or whatever. It becomes important things to talk about, and important things to deal with and things like that. And I think that this book definitely tries to touch on what we think at this point are the more important skills to have a practical music skill to the tools to basically continue on with a career, basically doing music for games essentially. Understanding lots of aspects, and it doesn't really emphasize too much of like a particular tool or a particular way to do things. It's more about changing your thinking about how music is supposed to progress so that you can then encompass interactive and adaptive ideas into that. And one of the things that we actually did relatively recently is that at one time we were actually thinking, okay, we'll have this chapter and then we'll have these practical assignments or exercises at the end of this chapter, and then we'll have another chapter and then practical. And after a while, we actually decided to decouple the assignments completely from the text, so as to be able to provide instructors. I mean, and we are definitely kind of aiming this also for schools and for people who are teaching people about game music and game audio to some extent too. So that they have a wide variety of options available, and there's not like a situation where it's like, oh, that assignment has to go with that chapter, and therefore they can kind of like mix and match based on the skill level of their students in the classroom, and we think that's a better approach comparatively speaking.
And how about if I finish this off on my mic?
Yeah, I figured.
I'll finish this off and then you can.
I'll take the stage, yeah.
Yeah,
You'll play cleanup.
Yeah. So, just to Scott's point, this book comes, Sean, out of our 10 years now of teaching this subject in the classroom. And after we dominated with the essential guide to game audio and defined everything about every sound that needs to happen in the game, right? Domination. That's a bad word. I don't use domination. I'm sorry about that.
No, I mean, we dominate the markets. So it's okay.
Okay, so, but this book is really near and dear to my heart. It's been great to work again with Scott on this, and it's been great to work with you on this, actually, because it's like we were just talking about it the other day. I mean, we talked about doing this book 5-6 years ago, like pre-pandemic, and we've been talking about it for a while, and the fact that you're still, doing what you're doing and we're still doing what we're doing is, I think, quite rare, right? I mean, and so it's great that we're able to get the team back together again to do this,
Put the band back together.
Put the band back together. But thank you. That was a musical reference I missed. But what I'm trying to say is that this is a book very near and dear to my heart in terms of kind of getting to what we've been talking about the technical side. I try very much now. Yes, my students need the technical side. There are certain technical skills that they're going to need. It just comes with the territory. But the creative side, right? And then not just learning the theoreticals, but applying that creative side is so important. And that's what we've tried to do with this book. So we have chapters on orchestration where we're analyzing and actually looking at scores. Gary Scheinman, which many people know about, who wrote one of the first orchestral scores for this game Foyer, right? Gary was nice enough to let us use some pages of his original score, handheld score. So we go through orchestration, we're looking at tons of examples. Scott has broken down amazing system breakdowns of games, popular games like Persona 5 and Breath of the Wild. So we're really, really trying at the end of the day to give in this book to teachers the same thing that we take into the classroom, that I take into the classroom, which is context. Let's give them the context they need. Let's talk about music and the technical stuff. It'll come. That'll be part of it. But this book is very much centered on the art and craft.
And my books are Game Audio Programming Principles and Practices. Volumes 1 through 3 are the ones that are already published, and Volume 4 is forthcoming. So these are what's the going for? There are into each chapter in the book is written by a different author, and so it's game audio programmers throughout the industry. Some of them are extremely low level, touching on crazy DSP things. Some of them are extremely high level, talking about generative music or just audio engine architecture, or project management, those kinds of things, tool development. So all kinds of things that audio programmers do in our day-to-day jobs. Volume 4, I just, 2 weeks, got drop of chapters from my contributors. I've got a couple more that I'm waiting on, but I'm excited because this is like I get to read all these chapters before anybody else. I learned, and I actually keep my previous volumes by my desk, right at my desk, so that I can refer to them because I've used them. Like, I need this. Let me pull up a chapter where somebody talks about exactly how to do this.
So it's a cookbook, basically.
Sort of.
I mean, because it's coming from different sources, right? I mean,
Yeah, if you have it's very specific recipes for like.
Right.
It's kind of an excuse for you to get free knowledge. And for you to get free books written for you.
No, I do. It's great having a contributor because I learn as much in putting these books together as I do from just doing work.
Right.
And sometimes it's happened on a number of occasions when I'm like, I need to solve this problem, and then a chapter comes in from a contributor that is exactly that problem solved.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I should just do that. So yeah, it's volume 4 is coming out sometime. It's due in a little over a month to the publisher, so hopefully I'll finish it by then. But it should be a problem. And yeah, coming out soon.
It's awesome.
Well, I just want to thank all three of you for doing this and also doing the books, the great books you do for CRC Press. Again, discount code DIS20. I know we all now have a very busy GDC to get back to, but yeah, I want to thank you all again.
Thank you.
No worries, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
All right.
Yeah.